and welcome to Think About It. I'm Sylvia Henderson, your host, and I invite you to tune in, take what you see and hear, and, well, think about it. So today, we are talking about retirement, yet not quite in the way you might be thinking. Because a lot of times when we think about retirement, we think about, oh my God, can I afford financially to retire? Well, my guest is a financial planner. However, we're going to talk about something a little bit differently, our life plan for retirement. So my guest is Alex Seleznev, and he is the president, founder of Capital Square Financial, and he's also a financial planner, but he focuses on retirement. So Alex, welcome to Think About It.
Oh, thank you, Sylvia. So great to be here with you today.
So first off, I ask all my guests, what led you to start focusing on well, not just financial planning, but also on retirement as a specialty?
Absolutely, yes. So I've been doing this work for a little over 16 years, and what I observed over time that planning for someone's retirement, specifically when people transition into the next chapter of their life, can be much more complex. So you really need to have essentially all three types of background: investment, financial planning, and tax. Again, it can be much more intricate, and it can be much more time-consuming. There's a big, very big difference between a general and a true retirement plan.
So with those three specialties, do you do all three, or do you work with other people who are like focused on taxes and focused on the other aspect you mentioned?
Absolutely. So my job, the old term for it they used to call it quarterbacking. I'm not really into that term as much because not everyone is into football, I guess.
That's true.
But
I still don't know what 10 down means or whatever.
Well, there's something
down
to be said about that, but my job is to coordinate. My job is to create a plan or a retirement plan for my clients and then coordinate with other professionals, CPAs, of course, for tax preparation purposes, estate planners, specifically those that specialize in elder law. I also work with, just to make an example, with real estate professionals who specialize with helping,
the downsize.
Downsizing, yeah. So there's that ecosystem essentially, and I'm, part of that.
I love that term, ecosystem. The other thing, when we were talking offline, you mentioned you have a holistic practice. Now, I picture a holistic as burning incense and needles in my arm and all of that. So.
No such thing. The idea is to really go beyond the numbers. We, of course, talk a lot about the numbers, specifically initially when my clients first engage me for the first year or two. But once they're comfortable with their finances, usually they open up, which is what, in some sense makes my work very interesting. And you start learning about their true goals or sometimes their actual fears. And, more often than not, it's not about the money. Even though that's the perception. Money is important, of course, but in terms of the fears, that is very frequently not the main one.
Now, if I sat down with you and first met you and you said, well, I've been doing this for 16 years, I'm sitting here with gray hair, looking at you thinking, okay, you're young now, 16 years ago, what can you possibly tell me about retirement? How does that make you legit?
Well, but you see, again, this is personal to me. This is one of those, life stories I had. Again, I shared with you. My father passed away, and at the age of 70, he was very young and healthy and everything. And what was quite apparent when we started dealing with his finances, I'll be frank with you, I was not prepared for that, even though we talked about it. He had no plan in place. His only plan was to save, as much as possible, and essentially never spend it. That was the plan, or spend it at some point in the future. So talking about holistic planning, one of the, I'm going to say, differences of, let's say working with myself versus someone else, I encourage people to spend more and as early as possible, of course, taking into consideration, their finances and overall goals.
Okay. So when somebody comes to you with the financial thing in their head, what are the other things you do explore? You said it a little bit, but even more specifically, you talk about where we live. I'm throwing things out. What are some of the things you ask about and you talk about non-financial that feed into finance, I would think.
Absolutely. So again, usually we're talking about third, maybe fourth meeting. I do want to make it clear. It's not like we start talking about things of that nature, more personal, in our introductory meeting, unless someone is open to that. But I would say more often than not, that is not the case. You need to have that relationship. Talking about retirement here, I believe I shared with you in the past, once people hit a certain, point in terms of their finances, more often than not, they continue working. You start asking them, well, why? Why would you do that? I mean, you can afford to retire, but then they start opening up for professionals specifically. They've been in their business, as attorneys, doctors, you name it, financial people, their whole life. Their entire network is built around their professional life. In some cases, most of their friends, personal connections. So they're really afraid of being disconnected from their circle, essentially. So they start opening up to you and they say, look, sure, it is that one more year, but I'm not really doing it for money. I'm just afraid that, I'm going to lose that respect. I'm going to lose that status, especially, again, when you start working with people, who made it high in their career.
Okay, I never thought about the networks that you build and the life that you've built professionally.
Yeah.
Retirement means leaving that, possibly. So are there things you can tell people? And I need to say that Alex is not giving financial advice. He's not giving coaching or whatever other advice. He's talking about his experiences with people. So I like to make sure that's on, I used to say on tape, but whatever. Make sure that's in the video. Sure. So how do you prepare somebody for the non-financial things that they're going to face in retirement?
Well, so you need to think about it. That's the bottom line. And I'll give you two, broad examples here. So the first one is when people run away into retirement. I usually, even share that with them, again, once we establish a certain level of relationship, meaning that they dislike their work. Perhaps they like their colleagues, they like the network and everything, but the work is tedious. They've been doing it for the past 20, 30 plus years, and they're really escaping into retirement. In many cases, that's a big mistake. Why is that? Because they have that vision in their head that, they're going to retire, they're going to start traveling, they're going to start playing more golf and all of those things. And that's great and that's true. But how much of that are you going to do? In terms of traveling, believe it or not, at some point it gets old. At least that's the feedback I get from my clients. Next thing you know, 2-3 years later, they're unhappy. They have the money. They're comfortable. Okay. They go back to work. Why? Because they had no plan in place. The second example I was going to give you, many people, I'd say most people, have transferable skills. You can go and teach somewhere, as an example. You can work somewhere pro bono. If you're so engaged, you can always start your own practice, perhaps without working full time. You can scale down 2-3 days a week. But if you have that network, well, chances are you'll continue to work with the same group of people. So there's many, many ways of thinking about it besides just saying, okay, on January 1st, I'm done. And again, that is really not common, at least in terms of the people I work with.
And I'm thinking a lot of the people that I belong to several boards, several organizations, and a lot of them say, my gosh, they're busier now that they've retired than they were when they were working.
Yeah. And you see, one of the questions, again, I like to ask when it's appropriate, I would say, what is it that you don't like about your work? Why are you thinking about retirement? And more often than not, it's not like, I don't like anything about it. They don't like the administrative component. They don't like the fact that they have to manage hundreds of people in some cases. They like the work, but they don't like those components of it. So by scaling down, doing something else, or again, start their own practices.
I remember there was a woman in my dentist office who I guess she was in her 60s, and she had retired from, I can't remember where, and I made a comment. She was behind in the back office with like file folders, boxes of them. And she was rippling through and putting them in the slots. And I said, isn't that like tedious? Isn't that boring? She said, I was responsible for, I can't remember how many people. I had to make decisions. She said, this is mindless and I love it. And I thought, I never thought of that. So, highly educated, but she loved the mindless, put things in slots. Because that was where she was by that time in her life.
Sometimes it's about the routines. There's that too. I'm not going to give any examples specifically, but I actually have clients, 2 clients who are in that type of profession. I find it to be incredibly tedious. And they actually admit it, but they keep doing it because that's what they're used to, and it keeps them happy.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, my mom used to retire from the school district, and she was very social. So she went back and had a job in administration where she didn't have to be on all the time, and she would laugh, and I'm sure it kept her going longer because of that socialness.
Well, absolutely, and especially where we are now, I'm going to say post-COVID. So every so often you hear something along the lines, well, my son, as an example, moved to Florida. They have children now. I want to spend more time with my grandchildren. Well, in the past, it used to be quite challenging because you had to commute to work on a daily basis. Now, I would say, in many cases, you can make arrangements with your employer so you work remotely, perhaps part-time out of state, in Florida in my example. So it's a combination of the two. You continue to work, let's say part-time, contribute to your firm, spend more time with your grandchildren, with your family, and continue, again, without retiring necessarily.
I did hear, so if somebody comes to you and says, I'm going to move because my kids have moved out to California and I want to move out there because they're out there. I've heard 2 levels of caution. Number 1, they're liable to move again because for their job. And number 2, your life is here.
Absolutely.
Think twice about that. So.
Absolutely. So that's, again, a common conversation, that I have with my clients. Okay, I'm retiring. I want to move somewhere. Almost always the first thing I say, rent for an extended time. Make it 3, preferably make it 6 months. Sure, you're going to spend a little more money and everything, but it's one thing when you vacation somewhere for 2 weeks.
Okay.
It's very different when you move to that place for the rest of your life. And as you mentioned earlier, in terms of your networks, you have to reestablish it essentially, and that can be challenging, especially again for people who are in retirement.
Yep. And vacation. So I think about vacationing at the beach, and 2 weeks, and that beach house is cool, and you look at it and you go, oh yeah, I want to buy a beach house vacation. Then you find out, well, no, I have to maintain it, I have to keep it heated. So it's not so cool anymore when you permanently invest in it.
Well, I mean, one of the I guess bad examples I have. So one of my clients, it's been a while now, she bought one of those properties at Outer Banks, and for some reason there was no thought into the fact that you can't really visit in the winter. Really disliked it. Sold it at a loss. That was a mistake, but it is what it is.
And we'll do an and because we need to take a break. When we come back, I want you to take us through the thought process from our 20s to our retirement for the things to think about and start doing non-financial, or that are financial is secondary. So sort of that life plan to get us ready for retirement. So when we come back, we'll talk about that.
If I could be you and you could be me for just 1 hour, if we could find a way to get inside each other's minds, if you could see you through my eyes instead of your ego, I believe you'd be surprised to see that you've been blind. Walk a mile in my shoes, walk a mile in my shoes. Yeah, before you abuse, criticize and accuse. Walk a mile in my shoes, walk a mile in my shoes. Well, before you abuse, criticize, and accuse, walk a mile in my shoes.
Hello and welcome back to Think About It. I'm still Sylvia Henderson, your host, and we're still talking about retirement. My guest, Alex Seleznev. I peeked at making sure I pronounce it correctly.
That's perfectly fine.
So we're talking about retirement, but not in a financial sense, or financial is secondary. It's more the life changes that we need to make, the life progression to be ready to have a happy retirement. Not just financially, but healthful in our health, in our mental state, and all of that. As viewers are all ages that I've got, so I'm thinking, if somebody's in their 20s, what should they be thinking about in terms of preparing their life, more than financial, for retirement, and then moving on? Take them through our generational evolution of our lives.
Well, absolutely. In this case, I'm going to do it in 20-year increments.
Okay.
Perhaps that's going to be a bit easier for me.
Okay.
So I would say for those in their 20s and 30s, I kind of tend to think of that group as one, essentially. To me, it's all about the habits. That is when you really want to have those right habits. It's not so much about your goals. I would say for many people, again, in their 20s and 30s, it can be quite challenging to determine what their retirement goals would look like, but at the same time, again, having the right habits in terms of your, work-life relationship, as an example, your relationship with money. Sometimes people just want more of it, but, what's the purpose? What is it that you're trying to accomplish? Now, for those in their 40s and 50s, one of the terms, perhaps, the viewers, they've heard about it, there's the so-called lifestyle creep, which is very dangerous, very dangerous. And what happens, again, in that age category, people tend to earn more money, and sometimes their earnings growth can be quite significant. But instead of, again, having those good habits to perhaps, save some of it, for the future, for their retirement, they just keep spending. And the reason that's the case is because, again, those habits, they never formed earlier in their lives. And then finally, I would say for the, next generation, people in their, let's say, 60s, 70s, and plus, I would say it's really all about your priorities. And what I discovered, working with, again, people who are thinking about in transition retirement, it's so different for many people. Some, they have a specific date in mind. Other people, they want to work forever. For some of them, it's all about leaving a certain amount for the next, generation, or supporting their favorite charities. That's what it's all about. So it's not just about that number. So
when you say habits, a little more about that. Do you mean a regimen they set for, work, dealing with family, or their health and wellness activities? What kind of habits?
Yeah, so I would say one of them is to have these conversations with your significant other, assuming you're married. Of course, if you're single, that's perfectly fine too. You would be one responsible for it. As an example, looking at your statements periodically. It's not so much a financial task when you look at it and you analyze it, but just to make sure that you understand what's being reported to you. So that would be an example of that. The other habit, or more of a shortcut really, when people get bonuses or when they get promoted. A third is what I like to say. Keep a third, for your spending, enjoy yourself, keep a third for taxes, and then spend the rest. Again, it's all about forming those good habits.
Okay, I remember when I would get promoted in the corporate world, I worked diligently to not up my lifestyle per se, but to make sure some of that bonus or some of that raise got put away.
Absolutely.
And then enjoy things a little bit. I'm thinking about so we have a heavy military presence here in the DC area. I don't know if you deal with advice to military folks also, but I'm thinking, and I've not been in the military, so my viewers who are thinking, what does she know? You're right, what do I know? But I have friends who retired from military, and there's a certain way they live. There's a certain something they're used to, being the boss or bossing people around or following a routine. How do you get them prepared for retirement into the civilian world, I'm imagining?
Well, I'll just tell you this. I do have a few clients who are former military. It's not necessarily my specialty, but I happen to work with some. To me, it's all about the personalized approach in terms of, again, how people work with you. I mean, just to give you an example, okay, again, I'll be perhaps blunt here. Some people prefer that you essentially tell them what to do. That is their preference. They wouldn't necessarily tell you that, Alex, tell me what to do. I mean, no one would ever put it that way. But they're not necessarily interested in all that analysis and how you came up with the answer. They just want to meet with you. Periodically, you tell them, do A, do B, do C.
Okay.
You know, that's what they want. Or vice versa. Other people, they're much more analytical, given perhaps their position out there, you know, military specifically. They want someone to, in some sense, report to them. And then they are the ones making those decisions. And that's fine, too. I'm very comfortable with both, and I have clients who kind of fit both of those categories.
Okay. We are in the age of technology, and artificial intelligence is like every day popping up. And I'm thinking, as a baby boomer, there are aspects of technology that can make my life easier as I age, and there are aspects of technology that make me crazy as I age. How do you envision, or even seeing now, technology influencing and affecting us moving into our retirement years and beyond?
Well, absolutely. So I've been noticing this trend for the past, I'm going to say 10 years at least, and I feel like it's been accelerating post-pandemic, the fact that people will be working for longer. And I do not mean it in a negative way. Sometimes it can, you know, we can look at it from that perspective because they have to, but now it's much easier, which can also be a disadvantage. Again, so to give you an example, I have a couple actually there, you know, near in retirement. They decided to move to Mexico. It's, you know, much less expensive to live there.
Okay.
They pretty much do the same thing. It's so much more convenient. 10 years ago, that was not necessarily a possibility.
Yeah.
We're fully connected now, which by itself can be a bit of a problem. It's, you know, with Wi-Fi all over, it can also be a challenge.
Yeah, we don't shut down like we used to. You know, close the door from work and go home. Work is home, and home is work. Yeah, but I'm thinking also of the things that will make life easier, like the delivery to your door and you get notified, or the smart home that sometimes turns dumb, which worries me about aging. And depending on technology, but I would think that would allow us to, I don't know, enjoy life longer?
Well, absolutely. I mean, the quality of life, not to kind of go in a different direction, but I noticed that post-pandemic, in terms of, again, my work and, you know, working with my clients, I've been more connected with them. Why is that? Because, you know, Zoom meetings, as an example, or video meetings, it's so much easier to arrange them. People don't have to drive for an hour to see you. And if they want to talk with you, you can arrange it, well, not necessarily the same day, but very quickly. And they just talk with you, you know, sitting on their couch. So same with the, you know, workforce. Same idea.
So I didn't tell you I was going to ask you this, but I'm going to ask you.
Sure.
Yeah, those of us who coach sometimes and advise sometimes hear the words come out of our mouths and we go, maybe I should be doing that. So what do you do to prepare yourself? And you have your own business, so prepare your family, I guess, for your retirement.
Well, so I do have a retirement plan in place. I mean, I know sometimes, what does that say in a cobbler without...
Yes, shoemaker's children don't have shoes or something.
I don't want to be one of those.
Okay.
Now, of course, for someone like myself, I'm planning to be in business for the next 20 to 30 years, which, Sylvia, by the way, one of the advantages for people who are thinking about retirement transition to work with someone like myself, because I'll be, you know, guiding them for the next 20 or 30 years. But in terms of, again, my work, again, the comments, they apply to me as well. I expect to work for as long as possible. I love what I do. You know, perhaps at some point I'll transition to a different environment, let's put it that way. But I certainly do not have a specific date in mind. And I'm not planning on having that date in mind anytime soon.
Do you ever help, again, business owners or business people at succession planning? And we're not getting into a business conversation per se, but I know business owners, we need to worry about succession planning to make sure the business remains viable, if that's the choice, as we retire and we gradually move out of business. I know I have plans for kind of easing out of the day-to-day of the business. What do you know, what kinds of things do you talk about in succession planning, if you do?
I do some of that work. I don't want to say it's my specialty, but I work with CPAs actually who can assist with that. So normally we would have a conversation in terms of the goals of the business owner. And in some sense, it can go both ways. In some situations, they say, you know what, my work is very technical. And, you know, I have my book of business, I have my clients, but it's going to be very challenging to bring someone in, given the nature of my work. So perhaps the best course of action would be to sell to a larger practice. I would say that's the most common for medical practices. Now, in other fields, I would say with law, small law practices, in some cases it makes sense to bring someone in and then eventually give them equity in your firm.
Okay.
Right? Because you have that name recognition, you have that brand, and you can train someone for that profession. So, I mean, there are multiple options, but like you said, certainly something you need to think about, and hopefully sooner rather than later.
Yeah. So as we're nearing the last couple of minutes together, how do people reach you, number one, although the contact info is on screen, I think, your website at least. But also, what other ways do you keep, if people want to know more and learn more, what other ways do you parse out your information?
Oh, absolutely. So, financial education or financial literacy is big. I'm really into that. So I have a newsletter that comes out every Wednesday at 7:30 a.m. So if anyone is interested, they can always sign up for it on my website. I do webinars almost monthly on different topics. Say most of them are retirement related. Okay. They don't have to be just about, but they're related. Of course, if talking about professionals, I'm on LinkedIn. I'm very active on LinkedIn, and I post 2-3 times a week, again, on current topics. Okay. So those are nuggets of information. I have a YouTube channel where I post short and long-term videos on different ideas. And you see, it's interesting. It consumes some of my time, but not as much as people might think, because I already do a lot of it. Okay. And a lot of my content comes from actually meetings with my clients. Of course, everything is private. I would never mention any names, but my thinking is if I get a question from 3 different clients, chances are I should generate a piece of content about that question, because someone else would be interested in that. Yeah. So, but there are lots of ways to stay connected.
So as we come to a close, what's the final message you want viewers to hear or to know about getting their lives ready for retirement?
Absolutely. So I truly believe that everyone needs to have a plan in place. Now, a good, effective plan can easily fit on a single sheet of paper. It, in many cases, can be more complex than that, but at least that, because that can prevent so many issues in the future, specifically, again, for those who are thinking about or transitioning into retirement.
Alex, thank you. And we can get all of that great info at your website. Absolutely. And with that, again, thanks. We're going to retire our program on retirement. And I appreciate viewers. You have tuned in. You take what you see and hear. And, I invite you to think about it. So until next program, I'm Sylvia Henderson.